Hello, everyone, and welcome to SHRM Memphis's critical conversation, the overdue awakening. Where do we come from here? My name is Bridget Wilson, and I serve as president of SHRM Memphis. It is my honor to welcome you to SHRM Memphis. If you're not a member, we would love to have you. I'd like to make a quick intro of our wonderful resources that we have on our website. We have our COVID-19 resource page, as well as our diversity and inclusion resource pages available. If you have not had the opportunity, please make sure that you log in to our LinkedIn page and follow us on LinkedIn. And always, our website is everything that's coming up from our upcoming events and resources are available on our website. Today's conversation will be difficult, and we at SHRM Memphis want to support our HR colleagues in getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it's my honor to introduce Randy Irving, our VP of Diversity and Inclusion.
Good afternoon, everybody. I first want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us for this very important conversation. And Bridget, I want to thank you for setting the stage. With everything that's going on and the stress that everybody's feeling and the need to have this conversation, SHRM Memphis felt that it was very important for us to take charge and be a leader in this aspect. And we felt that if we were quiet in this time, that we would be complicit in what's going on. Dr. King, and everybody likes to quote Dr. King, and I'm part of everybody that likes to quote Dr. King, but he posed a question in one of his books: where do we go from here? And in that book, he offered two paths that this country could go down: community or chaos. That question and those two paths are just as relevant and valid now as they were then. And unfortunately, you know, the road down those two paths, I don't know if it's ever been less clear than it is right now. We've got two crises that have currently magnified the disparities that Black Americans experience in this country. Right now, over 130,000 Americans have lost their lives to the coronavirus. And the mortality rate for Black Americans of that 130,000 is more than twice that of any other racial group in this country. So the nation also and the world's collectively laid witness to the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, who I have to bring to attention. Her killers have yet to be charged at this time. But this also highlighted the impact of systemic racism against Black Americans. So we've got this interwoven two crises that we're all bearing witness to. So as a nation and a world, we're feeling the impact of that crisis. And we really felt the need to have meaningful and candid conversation on the impact of those two, but more importantly, share with you some tangible means to the path forward. So we've put together, and I've always wanted to say this, we put together an esteemed panel, and I really feel that word is really apt for the panel that we have today. But they're covering the gamut from politics to community engagement and the business world. So what I would like to do is allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves to you today. And they'll do that by providing a brief intro into themselves. And I really would like for them to set the stage by answering two questions. You know, first, how are you doing in the midst of all of this? And I'd like for them all to share their why, you know, why the work that they do is important and what has drawn them to the work. So we will start out with Ms. Effie Johnson.
Thank you so much, Randy, for having me on the panel. And it's a very proud moment to be a part of something like this, so we can be a part of the change that is needed today. I wanted to share first that I am doing okay. I am processing through what is going on. And, you know, we used to say it is well and all is well, but all is not well. And so I am processing how to get back to my well. And so that's where I am today. But I'm grateful, and I'm very proud of what I'm seeing as a community of people in our city coming together. And then you asked about my why. my why is to help my neighbor in need have a better quality of life, to uplift those around me through words of encouragement and song, and to have a better life for my family, and to leave a legacy for them to build upon. So that's what my why is, and that comes from me loving to sing and loving to see people uplifted. But why is that? I was born in the midst of chaos and fear. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, at Collins Chapel Hospital on Air Street, April 10th, 1968, 6 days after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. My mother and I spent extended days in the hospital alone at night because my father had to abide by the curfews. And so I was musically gifted as a child, and all of those things, and they all contributed to how I responded to some of the things that I heard my parents talk about. Because my dad couldn't come out, because my mom had to endure, because they were African Americans that were trying to find their way. And so I began to be a part of a family that was a family of service. I was, like I said, musically gifted with strong entrepreneurial abilities. I was absorbed as a teenager. I was very, very selfish with no plans to work in service or to benefit anybody. And so as I grew and watched my parents, both teachers at the time, help people when they needed it, I began to see them feed countless of people, begin to help people when they had been burned out of their homes. And eventually they raised 75 community children in our home with no government assistance. I saw all of that. And so every day I saw love demonstrated, compassion demonstrated to people that needed it. But I grew toward in my high school years to not appreciate that. I wanted nothing to do with helping people. I wanted nothing to do with trying to lift a brother up. I wanted to do something that was outside of what Monroe and Joanne Ballard wanted me to do, and that was to help others, to help my neighbor. But over time, my why and purpose began to unfold. And no matter where I went, no matter what professional goals I had or choices I made, my heart would always find itself looking toward the underdog, the person that needed the most help. And so what I fought to get away from has given me the most meaning and has fulfilled me the most. And so that is my why. My why is to find those that need me and figure out a way to help them be better.
Wow. Well, we definitely are glad that you found your way back home to your why, and we're definitely thankful for you being with us here today. Next up, we have my friend and one of my mentors, Mr. Brad Federman.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it. I appreciate being here, and I'm honored to be a part of this panel amongst the folks that are here. And I too, I feel the same way, Effie. I'm focused on service. I chose what I'm doing. I run a company called Performance Point. The whole point of the organization is to help individuals, leaders, and organizations do better. We focus on engaging employees, building resilient relationships and collaborative cultures. And my personal mission is to inspire others to discover and live their possible. And that really comes from being passed down from my father. So I get it from family as well, Effie. My dad grew up as poor as he could be in New York City. And even when he was a young kid, he looked out for other people. And there's a story about him approaching the mayor of New York about kids in his neighborhood and the struggles they had. And the mayor, he wrote a letter to him, visited him at his apartment, and he helped change that neighborhood as a young child. And I never heard that story from him. I only heard it from other family members because he's too humble to share it. And that really shaped the direction I took my life. So I've gotten to see in COVID and some of the other issues about racial equity from a couple of different angles. One is from running my own company, and then two is helping clients. So I get both an internal and external perspective. And gosh, over the last several months, had more of that come up than ever before in our lives, which is a good thing. Even though it's a hard, difficult road to go down, we have to talk about these things. We have to work through these things, and I'm glad to be part of that conversation and help in any way that I can. So, you're on mute.
I see that. Brad, definitely thank you for joining us today. And we really look forward to some of the actionable things that you'll share that companies can do to help with both of these crises that we're mentioning. So up next, we have Mr. Mark Yates.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Randy, thank you for inviting me, good brother, and having me on your program this afternoon. And to the other panelists, my fellow panelists, thank you also for allowing me to be in the company of such an esteemed panel. You asked the question, how am I doing? That question is, I'm in the best of health. Thank you for asking. But that is a mental piece. From a, well, I'll reverse that. That's a physical piece. But from a mental piece, let me be crystal clear. I come and go. And we were just, prior to opening up our discussion here, we were talking about that. And I speak in terms of my household. We come and go mentally around here during these trying times. It's every day is interesting. There's something new. There's a new opportunity and a new challenge. So I'll express that. The second question you asked is the why. And why do I do what I do? My name, of course, is Mark Yates, and I am the president of the Black Business Association of Memphis. Some of you may have heard of the Black Business Association of Memphis, BBA. You may not have heard of it. And that is part of my role in terms of promulgating the message of who we are and what we do. I've been president since January of 2020. So I started the presidency then, both president and CEO. And so I took 2 years, as my associate and colleague says, I'm a curatorial visionary in terms of how do we look at the past and then marry the past with the present and then look forward and look at Black business. Our organization has vestiges back to the 1900s, 1908, really exactly. In its present form, it was formed in 1974 as the Black Merchants Association. And we are the Black Chamber of Commerce of Memphis. I want to especially give a shout out to Councilman J.B. Smiley. He is one of our benefactors from the city of Memphis. They are very supportive of our efforts. But if you look at, if you haven't been out on another planet for the last 6 to 8 weeks, you will note that there have been a lot of things that have been going on with Black people around the world. Here in Memphis, as we well know, we have a way of being dramatic in terms of how we interact with the world. And so from the chair I currently sit in, I look at it in terms of it all comes down to economics, the study of the allocation of a limited amount of resources to unlimited needs and wants. And then if you apply that in an equation basis, and you look at the equity in that equation, well, who has the resources and how do they allocate the resources and what are the outputs? And that's what we look at. And that's what we're looking at in terms of Memphis with a population of 65% Black, 35% split it up. But that is what we have. And then you look at the current state of Black people in Memphis, and you wonder what is the exponentiality of what will happen from the past to the present as we think, and what are the policies both economically and socially that we have to have an all due alacrity in order to institute to affect a positive change. So that is it. That's me. Thank you.
That's a big me, and you got a big task ahead of you, and you couldn't have taken over in a more crucial time, right? To take over in January of this year. We were just talking before we broadcast, like we're only halfway through the year, and it's already been such a traumatic year. So you've been through a lot probably in these last 7 months in your role, and you're going to go through a much more. But we're really, really glad to have you, and we really look forward to you sharing what our Black business owners can do to kind of weather the storm through both the COVID-19 and through this systemic racism period of upheaval. And next, we have J.B. Smiley Jr.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Councilman J.B. Smiley Jr. I was recently elected to the Memphis City Council in October of 2019. Been in a role, I guess, as soon as I got my feet wet in January. We were in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm gonna try not to get too deep at this point, but as relates to your question, how am I doing? I am busy due to my deep concern about the state of our nation. I'm concerned because when we look at COVID-19, the nation's response to COVID-19 and the nation's response to the Black Lives Matter movement, it simply does not get us to the point of reconciliation, to the point where all people can come together and understand that we have to take a turn that is more inclusive, more progressive for everyone as it relates to economics, as it relates to educational equity. We have to get to the point that, you know, all kids, all people are taken into consideration. And my why, I think it's incumbent on us all who have access to this medium to use our privilege to help people and help communities that have been deprived of their voices, but not only their voices, their communities that have been deprived of resources, and use it so that we can put them in a trajectory of success. Thank you all. I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
Well, JB, we definitely thank you for coming. And I just want to once again thank all of the panelists. Everybody, when I reached out to them, they cleared their schedules, they made time for this, and we're so appreciative of that. And we thought it was very important to have a voice from each sector. You know, having a voice from Black minority business owners, having a voice from someone who helps companies systemically put in policies and practices in place, having someone from a political standpoint that's actually with their sleeves rolled up, fighting for policies and practices for the people, and then also to have someone from a community engagement standpoint. We really want to make sure that we gave all of those sectors a voice, and we're able to share some meaningful and actionable things to do to take us on this path forward towards community. So with that said, we're gonna jump right in and get started. And I'm separating it by round. So round one is gonna be dedicated to COVID. On January the 23rd of 2020 in Washington State, the United States had its first confirmed case of COVID. And since then, things have just almost gone off the rails. I don't want to sound too dramatic, but I don't know if we could frame it in too dramatic a way. For our panelists, my first question is, what historic event do you liken what you've seen with COVID-19 to? And what has been the most impactful or the most alarming thing that you've seen with COVID-19 thus far?
Well, for me, in my lifetime, HIV/AIDS demonstrated a sizable range and impact to multiple large populations throughout the world. And that was my first introduction to hearing something about epidemic or a pandemic. And so I felt like there were some correlations between how do we respond? I mean, how does this transfer? And because the kind of work I was doing in the community, we would have many folks that were affected or infected or affected by this coming to our facilities, and we were trying to figure out, how do we engage? Do you wear a mask? Do you wash your hands every time you talk to somebody? You know, whatever it is. And so those are things that we as a culture, as a community of service leaders, had to learn how to ensure that we treated people with dignity while we were trying to learn about something that was new. And so that was something that was very impactful to me, that I felt like had a worldwide type of experience like we're dealing with now.
You know, when I thought about this, because there's a lot of things that have some connection to in terms of parallels, but when I sat down and thought about this, I had to say none. And at the same point in time, I had to say several. And what I mean by that is, I don't think we can look at COVID solely on its own. I mean, probably it's been at least close to 100 years since we've experienced a pandemic like this before, like this, 1918. And on top of that, we have economic trials that are going on that remind us of 1929. And then we've got the whole concept of racial justice, which reminds us of the 1960s. So to me, we look at this year with COVID, I can't separate it out completely because I think they're all interrelated. Yeah. And then when I look at that, on top of that, I have to overlay this concept of disruptive change to the economy and life because of technology and because of science advances and things happening so fast that puts on just not only opportunity, but a lot of strain on people, on society, on relationships, on coping. And so to me, I just have to say that I think in order to really look at this and get our arms wrapped around this, we have to look at this as broader than just a pandemic. We have to put it into context of what's uniquely different today than we've ever been before in our life. And I think people are struggling on the basis of resilience, dealing with emotions, emotional intelligence, and the ability to manage change and agility. I think that is really a difficult piece because you've got all these tactical things going on, you've got all these symptoms, and it's putting a strain on people's ability to keep up and deal. So.
Great. I have to agree with Brad. It harkens back to a lot of times, but it's everything is novel. Everything is new. I guess that's why they call it the novel coronavirus. It's COVID-19. I mean, when we first knew after the World Health Organization on March 15th thereabouts announced that we had an international pandemic, we immediately saw, people were going to the grocery store to get food. They were clearing out all the toiletry products, toilet paper, food. So grocery shops grocery stores were cleared out. Then we saw you couldn't buy, and let's talk about this. You couldn't buy any bullets. You can't find 9mm bullets anywhere. You can't buy guns. You can't find guns. And so so if you look at and I always come at things from a historical perspective. And if you took an economics class 101, the first thing you start to talk about is guns and butter. Remember that? And so we immediately saw what was going on. You had food, guns and butter, food. And so what does that mean? You have to then begin to just look at all the variables that you have going across our spectrum of, you have this, and then you exacerbate that with the unfortunate things that happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis. And then I always bring it back home. And I think about, okay, let's juxtapose what happened in Minneapolis, what's happening in locally. One of the first things I thought about is, okay, Minneapolis has a 7% population that's Black, African American. In 2012, there was an Economic Policy Institute report that came out that said that there were two communities that had the highest, and this was post when we had the Great Recession. There were two communities that had the highest unemployment rates. The first was Minneapolis, Minnesota, for Black people. It had a 15 plus or minus percent unemployment rate. Memphis at that point in time, had about a 14.9, 14.5 unemployment rate. But we also have, again, looking at them in Minneapolis, they had a 7% population of Black people. We've got 65% down here, and we were popping at 14% unemployment. And so you look at your misery index, which is an economic indicator amongst Black people. So just kind of extrapolate along those lines. What are we dealing with? And I know we're speaking to a national audience, but you have to look at these old line river towns along the Mississippi. So from Memphis to Minneapolis, what's going on in these towns, these old Rust Belt towns, if you will, and what is happening. And then you exacerbate that with the racial piece. Then you add COVID. Then you add national policy, international policy. What is our leadership doing? Those are the questions that we have to ask and begin to understand what's really going on. So this is my copy of the book. Where do we go from here? This book was bought by my uncle Frank, who's a two tenured professor at the University of Michigan in 1968. He bought it on Mississippi Boulevard in South Memphis. And it's dog-eared because we refer to it. And the answers and the questions that have been provoked were asked by Dr. King. And so at this point in time, we have to decide, are we going to address those questions that have been asked? So I'll stop at that.
Okay. Right. JB?
Trying to get my, okay. So I'm 32 years old, and I can't, when I attempt to think about, what I can compare to the COVID-19 pandemic, I really can't liken it to anything. But the only thing that I could, remember that, essentially shook the core of this country was 9/11. I remember exactly where I was when it took place. I remember exactly where I was when, COVID-19 began to spread as it is. And I just think about that moment. I remember, the government, going all over trying to figure out, what's the next step. And I remember the same thing as it relates to COVID-19, but what's key here is I don't think we can talk about COVID-19 without also talking about the civil unrest that was also going on in the same time. And for me, I think we have to talk about them interchangeably because, both disproportionately affect Black lives. Both have a significant impact on the wealth of Black lives. And I think, when we talk about that, we have to talk about, ways in which we can put these individuals in a position of success.
All right. Thank you, JB. One thing for everyone who signed on, we will have a Q&A period after each round. I'm asking that you type your questions in the Q&A function. And what we'll do at the end of each round, we'll select 2 participants to actually live ask their question, and then we'll read 2 questions out. So if your question gets selected for you to go live, we're going to open it up so we can see you. So be prepared, but please send your questions in through the Q&A function, and we'll select the questions for the panelists to take. Now, next, what I want to do is go over some of the stats, and these stats are now a couple of days old. But in the United States, we got about 2.9, almost 3 million cases. And from that, we've got over 130,000 deaths. And then when we look at from a Shelby County standpoint, and we take that deeper dive, we've had 143,000 COVID tests administered. And we know that we're not administering tests as we need to because we just don't have the scale and capability. But of that, we've had 12,165 positive COVID cases. And like JB said, it's hit certain communities much more tough than it's hit other communities. And so I want to talk to you and ask you some questions around what do you see as the responsibility from a government standpoint? What do we see as our responsibility as community standpoint and as from an individual standpoint? And what are companies' responsibilities in helping us deal with and address this pandemic?
I will chime in here as it relates to government's responsibility. I'm trying to be as direct as possible. I think the government responsibility, especially on the local level, is to make tough decisions. If I could just, pull up my city email and scroll through the different emails I receive as it relates to the mask ordinance. I know we were one of the first large municipalities to pass an ordinance that required individuals to wear a mask. But the large percentage of the emails that I received came from people in communities who are more affluent than the district that I represent. And a lot of times, you know, when I think about that, is because their communities were not hit as hard as the Black communities were. And, you know, my response to them was simply, I appreciate your concern in, you know, the economic well-being of certain businesses, but what I will not do is I will not value dollar over life. And I think that's the type of decision you have to make. You have to, your government has to say that, you know, I understand that this is impacting you, impacting your pockets. But here we're talking about, you know, the potential longevity of a people. And, you know, you have to make tough decisions. And sometimes there will be people who would disagree with you on that point. And for my colleagues, they pushed hard on whether or not it was feasible, whether we should be doing it. And I told them, you know, I can't go to sleep in my community when my next door neighbor could potentially, you know, have COVID-19, and they will knock on my door. They know where I live. So for me, it's just about, you know, putting, letting your representatives know, letting your government know that it's okay to make tough decisions, and that's why you were elected, to make tough decisions.
A great point. Thank you, JB.
From a community perspective, you know, we had to quickly decide as an organization and then connect with other organizations that were serving people in need that did not have access, didn't have a voice. Some people didn't even know that it was happening, not paying attention to the news or whatever at the beginning. And so I felt the responsibility for us was that we began to take action immediately by going out and talking, surveying our community, the citizens of our communities we were serving, and also began to get the masks out there. For everything we learned, as quickly as we learned it, we wanted to respond and not be a reactor or give JB a hard time, but listen to our leaders and follow what they were saying and begin to advocate for what leadership was saying to do, so we can be in concerted effort to respond and help reduce the challenges that we were facing. And then in response to those who were becoming to be more and more positive, COVID-19 positive, we felt it was important for us to help senior citizens not have to figure out how they were gonna get out of their house, or folks that were sick, helping them to stay home and bring the food to them. And so we as a organization came alongside other partners that were similar to us and said, how can we respond to help reduce chaos, communicate what we're learning, translate when there was words or vocabulary that people would understand. So I felt that was a responsibility of us as community leaders, community liaisons, gatekeepers to our community, to be that voice and to be that translator for those that maybe didn't get it.
Thank you, Effie.
You know, to put in context what I think organizations need to do, I think you need to sort of set that stage. You'd ask what's alarming. And I think, you know, when you look at this experience, the illusion of control that people had in their lives, the illusion of predictability got lost. You could go to the store and you might not get toilet paper. I mean, I literally got toilet paper because we had a really bad experience at one of the grocery stores, and they hid it in a cart because it was in the back, but they hadn't put it in the shelves yet. And they brought it to my car, and I had to slip it into my car secretly. I felt like I was doing some kind of illegal deal because toilet paper was such a big issue. But you'd walk in and you might not get flour, or you might not get ground beef. So this concept of stress starts taking over. And then you've got the concept of conspiracy theories and low quality junk food news and information that's being spread across the internet and everywhere else. And then on top of that, you've got social distancing, which I prefer to call physical distancing, because I don't think we should socially distance ourselves. I think we need to remain connected, but it's caused a disconnection. And then on top of that, we have this individualism in this country, which further separates us sometimes in terms of how we feel. So you put that together, and this is about a month into COVID. This is just a month, so it's worse now. But 70% of employees said COVID-19 was the most stressful time in their career. 94% noted they lost productivity because of COVID. And what's even more alarming was within 3 to 4 weeks of the COVID situation, there was a stark 21% increase in prescriptions for antidepressants, anxiety, and insomnia. Mark, you said earlier, it comes and goes. It's difficult. It's emotionally hard, and it has been emotionally traumatic for people in this country. Some people not even recognizing it. So when you talk about what organizations need to do, we really need to be talking about helping people think through financial concerns. They're worried about financial security, not just the ones that have lost their jobs, but even the ones that have kept their jobs. We have to help them think through and work through health and well-being issues. We have to help them think about their family welfare responsibilities. Their family needs to be taken care of. And I know we're spending enormous amounts of time at work doing a variety of things, looking at things like policy, procedures, process, assessments, right? Hazard assessments. How do we revamp the office to allow people to have space and social distance, right? All these different things. Can they order coffee via phone instead of going to the cafeteria? All these things we're thinking about. But one of the key things that I think we're forgetting is that we must reinvest in leadership and help leaders understand what their people are going through each and every single day. Because our attendance policies are cruel when you have a working mother who has to be at an office but no place to send her kids to school. We have to work through the concept that we are walking back into trauma centers, not just workplaces. And the job of leadership is to be a counselor and to be a referral to good mental health resources. And if we don't think that way, we will punish great employees who are having challenges and problems because they no longer can function and be productive the way they used to, not because they're bad employees, but because of what we just discussed and what is happening in their lives. We have to reinvest in leadership, and we have to demonstrate empathy and connection with people. That's got to be first and foremost.
That's really powerful, Brad. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Is it me?
It is on you, Mark.
Thank you. So I think you want me to talk about minority business and how do small minority businesses recover and take advantage of resources that are available. So after March 15th, the first thing that we looked at from our team was we looked at the number of Black businesses locally in Memphis and Shelby County. So you've got 39,000, according to the 2012 census, you've got 39,000 Black businesses, 26,000 white businesses. And if you just extrapolated from that, if you said, okay, an average payroll a month from a median standpoint would be $10,000 a business a month, 3 months, kind of working it out from a 12-week basis, that number gets somewhere between $205 million to $1.2 billion. Now, think about that. Let that sit for just a second. What that means is that money was immediately coming out of the households of our friends, of our neighbors, of our relatives, of the people that we go to church with, all that. That immediately got sucked out. And then we had the CARES Act pass. In the CARES Act, you had PPP and EIDL, the EIDL. And you looked at the statistics that just recently came out and how many Black businesses were able to actually take advantage of EIDLs and or PPP. And so it was less than a percentage of a percentage, whatever it was on a national basis. Black people are helpless and harassed when it comes to economics, especially in this community. And what it does, it reflects and it shows the weaknesses in our system, the fissures, if you will, the spots that were they were plastered over, they were shellacked over, they were covered over. But COVID-19 has done a just only a creator could do a job like this. He's pulled it back and he's shown what we have work to do. and the opportunities that we have to work together as we advance. And these are just facts. These are just numbers. So, you know, how do we change? Change is painful. If you look at any change from, you know, athleticism to personal fitness, to if you look in nature and if you see growth, how do we change? And we have to reflect and look into ourselves and say, okay, are we ready to change? And those are the questions that in 1967 and 1968, Dr. King was asking. He was asking, are we ready to change? And he says it. He says, and this is on page, and I'm referring to the book, y'all. So 191, page 191 of Where Do We Go From Here? We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. That's what he said over 50 years ago.
Hey, thank you for that, Mark. I think one of the things that often gets lost in Dr. King's message, especially with his message being so focused around nonviolence, was that he was willing to take his time and bide his time, but he was not. He was very impatient about wanting to change. And I think in the day's time, with everything that we've got going on, we see one of his key messages was that whatever happens to the least of people impacts everybody. And if there's a threat to anybody or the justice anywhere, it's a threat to justice, and it's a threat to everybody everywhere. And we're seeing that now. And I think COVID-19 and the civil unrest that we've seen from the murder of George Floyd has uncovered all of that. Like you said, for me, one of the most alarming things was just to realize and see how fragile our ecosystem was and how easily it was pushed off its tilt. You know, other countries have dealt with some of these pandemics like Ebola, SARS, and things of that nature, but we had always done a good job of stemming that, and it didn't impact us here. But now that we have been hit, we see how fragile our ecosystem is, and it's really been thrown off tilt. So I really would like to ask, why do you guys feel the Black and Brown communities have been so at risk for COVID, and how do we help to change that and stem the tide and make that community more safe as it relates to that?
Well, of course, I'm not a health professional, but I can say just from visual, we have 10 locations in the city that are in some of the poorest communities in Memphis. And my teams would say, we need more masks. And we would have to find people to help us make masks, teach how to create masks. And so access, we don't have the same money. We don't have the ability to get in and out. And so transportation, all these things were cut out right from the beginning. We already had those problems. And so this stacked on top of that just made it harder. And so I think about myself. I have about 10 different masks in my car hanging around, you know, on something, you know, and when I jump out the car to run in, I've got my mask. I'll go back, grab the mask, go in. If I need to get a mask, I can buy one at a gas station. I have access. I have some money that I can use to do what I need to do. When you don't have any food, or you don't have any of these things that are basic to most of us, adding this created a new problem. And so that's some of the things that I've noticed. There are other areas, but just being already in depression, already suppressed, already dealing with a lot of the environmental issues. And so this is just one more thing that I got to figure out how I'm going to survive. And so some of those that we are engaged with, some of our neighbors, have just decided, I don't know if this is even real. And so trying to convince our people that this is something that is real, that it is hurtful, and that whatever we can do nutritionally to take vitamin D, vitamin C, I don't know what all you're supposed to take, but let's make ourselves more healthy. Well, I can't buy that. I can't buy vitamins. Vitamins cost a lot of money. And so how are we providing proper nutrition and trying to find vegetables and fruit to get to people so that they can have a better a chance of surviving this? So these are the things that we're facing as a result of lack of access and lack of resources.
Just to piggyback off of Ms. Johnson, health disparities. She talked about access. She talked about resources. When I think about, you know, us attempting to pass the mask ordinance in the city of Memphis, for those of us who represent a large, predominantly Black population, the very first thing that came up is, where are we going to find enough dollars so that we can purchase masks for the people in these communities? Because, you know, part of the district that I represent, 38126, the example, the poorest zip code in the state of Tennessee, they have some real challenges. And we talk about, you know, whether they're going to keep their lights on. So we had to make sure that there was a moratorium on MLGW turning off the lights. They have challenges in terms of, that's a food desert. They have to catch public transportation to get to the grocery store that's like 2 or 3 miles down the street, whether they're going to the one on 3rd Street, whether they're going to the one on Union. But guess what? The majority of the people in their community do not have transportation. So when they go into the corner store to buy fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, to ultimately get there and decide or find out that there is no fresh vegetables, fresh fruit, and have to decide to buy a bag of chips and a canned soda, conditionally, in terms of their health is going to be in worse condition. And when you're dealing with a virus such as the COVID-19 that, you know, preys upon people who have pre-existing conditions and pre-existing conditions, automatically you're going to have a population of people who have or are at greater risk of, you know, being susceptible to this virus. So there's a lot of different things, a complex myriad of things that make up why the Black community is in such a bad shape as it relates to COVID-19. I think we can't just talk about, you know, lack of access, but I'm talking about the fact that, you know, there's health concerns there. Talk about the fact that a lot of the communities are in food deserts. There's a lot of things that we have to take into consideration. So there's no one fix. I think it's a systemic issue that we have to address on the federal level, but not just the federal level, not just the local level. A lot of times when I'm talking about, you know, issues within the city, I say the government alone can't do it. We need good corporate partners that understand that investing in these communities are just important as investing in communities that are more affluent. Because, you know, as Mr. Yates said, and as you stated earlier, you know, what happens to the least of these is also happening to me. We have to be considerate and concerned about everyone within this community.
Yeah. Thank you, JB. Mark, I think Brandon's on you.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, I just want to add jobs. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things we have to talk about is representation. When you look at C-level executives, I had a meeting with a group of C-level executives. It's actually about diversity and inclusion the other day, and I looked at the entire board, C-suite, the entire executive suite, and it was a bunch of white people, right? So, you know, the reality is that when you're talking about executive positions, when you're talking about leadership positions, minorities have a tendency to be less represented in those roles, and they tend to be more represented in frontline worker roles. And so, you know, you got to think about a health crisis like this. If we are, not we, but collectively, you understand, if a group of people are more represented in frontline roles, then they're right in the middle of the pandemic. Other people can remote work from home. They can avoid interactions. But if I am working at a restaurant, or if I am working in the hub at FedEx, or if I am working in a healthcare capacity, you know, greeting people, being an administrative assistant or a receptionist or whatever at a healthcare location, I am going to be affected by the COVID-19 pandemic more than people who don't have to be exposed as much. And so I think to some extent, part of it is representation in terms of the types of roles, which relates back to the economics that we've talked about earlier. And I just think we have to put that into context as well. So.
Mark?
Absolutely. I'll come at this from several different places. And first of all, I'll stick with my I'll be narrow in terms of the economic impact and what COVID-19 and what the civil unrest is currently meaning. You saw yesterday, it was leaders in Asheville, North Carolina. They've taken historic steps and passed a resolution regarding reparations. I just said it, reparations. And I say that because coming from a guy such as me who started his corporate career in 1984 at First Tennessee First Horizon National Corporation and rose to the title of Chief Investor Relations Officer, my role was to say things to the market, to talk directly to the market in clear and succinct patterns. So we see with a vote of 7-0, they said that this needs to happen over there in North Carolina. Well, you have to go back in history, and I'm not going to give people history lessons, but I will encourage you to go and look at the history of our own community. I'm dealing with Memphis, Tennessee, and say what are we doing here, and what can we do? Where the question, your premise question, Randy, was as the book says, where do we go from here? So you look, and reparations is just a word, but there are other means. And so that's government that's doing it over there. And I've worked in government. I've worked in several different facets of government. But what are we doing at the corporate level? And how do we lead from the business side? What can our business leaders do? If we look at EPS, which is the one metric, earnings per share, the one metric that corporate leaders, which drives, and some people may argue that we don't live in a republic, we live in a corporatocracy based upon the amount of dollars that are used to fund elections. But what are our corporations doing, and how can they participate in helping to right some of the past injustices? And the injustices are plenty. I mean, and then you can look back, and they're not just injustices over, if a balance sheet is a snapshot in time for financial performance, but look at the balance sheets over the last 400 years and look at the snapshots and the performance over that period of time and see where people of color, where Black people have come in terms of their subjugation, their usage, and their lack of equity. The basis of this whole discussion from the seat, and I said from the seat in which I sit, is equity. And if you have no equity, if you have no ownership, if you don't have the ability to make decisions and to affect those decisions economically, you essentially, in a corporatocracy, in a republic, you have no voice. And we get the situation that we currently have. And so that if anybody argues that point, and has something, different to say about it, I am open to all arguments. And that's where I want to be. So thank you very much.
All right. So I want to show just a few more, some more data points to lead us into the next discussion. When you look at it, there have been some countries that have handled flattening the curve and handled the spread of it really well. Canada's only had 95,000 cases with only 7,000 deaths. Iceland, only 1,806 cases, 10 deaths. South Korea, 11,000 cases, only 273 deaths. On this slide right here, this is a photo of some bodies being taken out that were COVID related. And Frank DiPaolo, who is one of the chief medical examiners, he's running the mortuary in New York City, it says that we do this for the living, not for the dead. And he's talking about the resources that have been put into place as far as handling the bodies that have been left from COVID-19, which he also previously worked during the 9/11 crisis. So when they were getting bodies from the building of the World Trade Center, and the capacity of the mortuaries were stretched for that period of time, you look at it, the capacity has been stretched out about 4 times that, and it's gone on for 4 or 5 months now, whereas 9/11 was that one singular moment. So my question is, how could we have done a better job of flattening the curve on the front end? And how do we make this real for people that may not understand how impactful this has been?
I can, so every Thursday, the city council and the mayor, we have a call with Dr. Jan, who is the city's infectious disease consultant. And usually when people ask me about it, they say, well, what's your position? I say, well, I'm a lawyer by trade, and I'm trained in the law. I'm not trained in medicine. And what we have to start doing is trusting the people who spend years of their lives doing the research on these type of issues. But to make my point real simple, trust the scientists. We have to trust the doctors. And once we do that, we understand how we need to respond. I think the problem with our government on a federal level was that we didn't trust the scientists. We didn't believe the numbers. We attempted to do everything but say, okay, this is what the professionals are telling us. These are the policies we need to implement. And toward the back end of it, we started to take it seriously. But by that time, we started, transmitting disease from every corner of this country. And I think we just have to trust the people who spend years in learning about these things. Believe scientists.
I think it's on Effie.
Effie, all right, good.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with what JB is saying. We have to begin to trust, even though we can't see it. This has proven to us that we can be taken out, we can be disabled by something that has nothing to do with our wealth or our resources or who we know. It's science. It's something that we can't see, and it still can hurt you. And so I believe that at the beginning of this process, I would have been a hope of mine that the leadership would have come together, been a little more comprehensive about what it was, what the truth was about what we were dealing with, and gave more of a mandate about this is what we're going to do first, and then move forward from there. And so that's my perspective, and that's my opinion.
Brad, I think it's on you.
I think one of the reasons we haven't fared well is, there's a price to pay for a certain level of freedom, right? We're not in China where we can just sort of say, here's how it's going to work, right? We've got limitations. I think that's a challenge. I also think we have a sense of individualism in this country, and cynical nature in this country that creates some challenges and problems when we want to come at something together. And we have to kind of get past some of that. I think what we really need is, we needed strong, clear leadership, which I don't think we really had. I think that's a big challenge. I agree with everybody on that. But I also think there's some individual personal responsibility that we all have to take. We have to make sure that we're looking at good information. There's junk out there, and then there's good information out there. You can go directly to sources that have a good reputation. And I think the challenge we have is that we have to get to a point where we do that. And I also think we need to focus on civics and the concept of learning what is constitutional and what's not. I think that's a big one. I have a person I know who had an employee walk into work and not wear a mask. And when she actually spoke to that employee, the employee said, I'm not wearing a mask, it's against my constitutional rights. And she said, no, it's policy in our workplace, and you can either wear it or you can lose your job. And honestly, I think people need to understand what's really against the Constitution and what's not, and people don't. They're just emotionally raw and reacting, and that is a problem in that we're facing. And then last, let's treat each other nicely. I mean, I had a woman at a restaurant who had to ask for our contact tracing information. And I got to tell you, she was apologetic, nervous, her voice cracked. And I said to her, ma'am, I said, what's wrong? What's going on? And she said, I'm just tired of people being so mean and ugly, screaming at me, yelling at me. I almost went into tears walking over to the dinner table. And I told her, I said, you won't get that from us. And I'll tell you what, if someone comes into this restaurant and gives you a hard time, I'll be the first one to get up there and defend you. We can't do that to each other. Come on. We're human beings. Let's treat each other nicely.
Mark?
All right, I'm gonna respond to this question like this. And Randy, you're responsible for this because during our pregame, you were talking about going to the movies and watching movies. So I'm gonna refer this way. So around my house over the last several weeks, we've been watching movies. You know, what does everybody do? And it just so happens my older daughter and I, we like horror movies. That's our thing. We like science fiction horror movies. And so one of the 4 movies that we've recently watched, and I'll go through them really quickly, is Alien in 1979, the original Alien. There's Predator in 1987. We watched The Thing in 1982, the John Carpenter version, and They Live. That's another John Carpenter. If you don't know the movie, you need to watch it. I think it was 87 as well. And what we started to find, and I can validate this, in grad school, we watched leadership. We studied leadership and how do leaders respond in times of crisis. And the thematic throughout all of these movies was you ignore the problem. There's a hidden enemy, and the enemy has the ability to destroy you and annihilate you. And even in John Carpenter's They Live, it was a subliminal messages were continuously being bombarded upon people. They were just being thrown, and it was about consumerism, ignore the problem, this thing is going to go away, it's not here. But Brad, you said something very key. It comes back to leadership. All successes and failures fall at the feet of leadership. And how do we respond? And it was just so in The Thing, which was, it's been remade 3 times, but it was an invisible, it came in and it morphed and it became what you needed to be. And I'm watching it with a group of college kids, and they literally are pointing at the screen and going, that is what's happening today with the coronavirus. And so I point these things out, the irony of when science fiction or when reality exceeds science fiction. And we have to be prepared as leaders to make the hard choices and not ignore the issues. So that's where I am.
Okay. I'm gonna go through 2 slides and then I'll ask the last question, and then we're gonna open it up for questions. And we've gone a little bit over, so we're gonna have to pick up the pace a little bit so we can cover round 2, which is of course just as important. We've seen the world pivot in a lot of different ways. When you look at testing, and right now there are 95 different vaccine efforts that are going on. And normally before a vaccine would hit the market, it takes 10 to 15 years. Right now, the goal is to have a vaccine for COVID out in 12 to 18 months, showing that we've got the ability to move up processes, even something as important and as complicated as virus research. Businesses, companies have pivoted their delivery models. Remote work has increased. From restaurant standpoint, you've seen enhanced to-go menus and options for restaurants. From entertainment standpoint, we've seen virtual concerts and DJ sessions, which I listen to DJ Jazzy Jeff every Saturday at noon. Now the NBA, they have a new playoff model that's about to launch at the end of this month. And we're seeing fanless events. So we're seeing that the world is adjusting, that we've got the ability to pivot, we've got the ability to move forward. But unfortunately, we have also seen some backlash and negatives. For those of you who may have never heard of Christian Small, he's a supervisor that used to work at Amazon that was fired for advocating for essential workers' rights in the plant that he was a supervisor of. Mark, you mentioned this earlier. Minority-owned small businesses have not received the loans and funding from the stimulus packages. And then, Brad, I think you mentioned this as well. There's been a backlash against the mask requirements and being, seen as attacked on people's constitutional rights as individuals. So as we've seen those things, my last question for the panel in round 1 is, what do we see, or what do you see as things that we've learned from this, and what is our actionable path forward to move towards community with this?
Well, for me, I've learned that that there's some things going on that I didn't expect to happen. For me, the world slowed down enough for everyone to begin to hear some of the silence, the cries that were the undertone of America in our culture, in Black America, and then also began to see what I call the new underground railroad up here. I saw white millennials out there marching and fighting for rights of Black people, and I was watching them and saying, "What's going on? Why would they do that?" And so for me, I have begun to have a renewed hope as well that things can be that we can do better, that we can have better, we can communicate, we can work together, and that we can begin to bring light to the discrepancy of mistreatment in America. And so that's where I am right now, and with hopes that things will change.
All right, Brad.
I'm going to say that the jury's out. I think some have learned, and some are learning, and some haven't. And I think of that in terms of individuals and organizations. So I would say the jury's still out. I look at this, if there's one piece of advice I'd give everyone, it's this. This is a practice run. I'm going to repeat that because I don't think people want to hear it or probably heard what I really said. This is a practice run. I just wrote an article before, probably at the beginning of COVID, before it really became a big deal. And I said, imagine working in an environment where the risk of a project failing is increasingly high, destructive technology is available to rogue governments and individuals at large, economic stability and individuals at large. Economic stability is in question at times, and or pandemic poses a global risk. It should not be that difficult to imagine. We're getting a taste of it right now. And the point I'm making is all of those things are predicted to happen in the next decade. We're expected to have probably 1 or 2 more pandemics in the next decade between now and 2030. This is a practice run. Our ability to address these issues, to become more nimble, to pivot, will determine whether or not we're able to get through and handle what comes next. And as a society, we've got to collectively figure it out. And we have to have a tipping point in the learning process, or we will have problems in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Brad. And I remember you previewing, you gave me an opportunity to read that article before you published it. So I remember when you were coming out with that. Mark?
With respect to this question, the only response I can begin with is the writing finger writes and having written writes on. And at this point in time that we are, how are we going to, the question becomes is, what are we going to do? Are we going to address the issues with all due alacrity? The 800-pound gorilla in the room is that we are a great country. We're a great nation. We're a great society. But we have faults, we have fractures, and those fractures begin underlying with racism. And we can't, until we eliminate the virus of racism that has run rampant in this world, we are not going to really have an opportunity nor a chance to deal with what Brad just talked about, because these things are going to accelerate at an exponential rate. That is what we're going, I mean, we saw when the first question we asked is, what is this like? And, JB made a very poignant statement. It's 9/11, but 9/11 was in 2001. Now we're in 2020. And so, we're having things that it's going to speed up. There is either you can ignore the monster that's in the basement, or we can go ahead and deal with it, and how we have to have an all hands on deck to get the solutioning. And for all you HR people on there, that when you have a diversity of people and have everybody at the table, that you get a better solution. So how do we affect that, again, with all due alacrity, to get people at the table and not judge people based upon the color of their skin?
Okay. All right. For the sake of time, Jenna is going to call out 2 questions, and we're going to kind of have like a round robin. So she's going to call out 2 questions, and whoever thinks that they have the best answer for it or it falls in their wheelhouse, we're going to have one person answer each question.
Okay.
Take it away, Jenna.
All right. Thanks, Randy. Here's a good one from David. What are the long-term concerns of remote learning if schools don't open or parents choose virtual learning? More directly, how disproportionately will the Black communities of Memphis be long-term affected by limited resources needed to succeed in education? For example, internet, iPads, computers, hotspots.
I am going to say that that sounds like a JB question. to me.
I was already ready to dive into this question. And that's a very, very good question. Let me start off by saying this. So thank you for that question, David. Recently, the Shelby County School Boards, in a, I think 8-1 vote or 7-1 vote, decided to give every student access to a digital device. On that digital device, we'll have the lesson plans, the worksheets, and everything that the student needs in the upcoming year. And to support that mission, the City Council decided to give the Shelby County School Boards $5 million in support of that to address the digital divide gap. But even if and when these devices get in the hands of the students, we still have a problem. We're asking mothers, fathers who do not have a background in teaching to provide some type of instruction to young people who are in their prime of their educational experience. And if we could just look at, what happens, because I think this is what we're going to fall in. I wish I could pull up like a graph or something. I was sitting on sitting on the digital divide committee, and they put on the screen what usually happens during the summer months. You have a growth chart that goes how much the student learns during the school year, but then when you reach the end of the school year and a couple of months during the summer, what they retain drops off. And I think what's going to happen this year, in particular, because we're asking people who are not educators to educate, if their students do decide to stay at home, we're going to have a similar drop off, but this time it's going to be for a longer duration. And what we're going to find is young people, especially in Black communities where the parents are working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet, who may not be able to provide any type of educational support for the child, those young people are going to have a sharp decline in the amount of information they retain. And I think what we're going to find ourselves in terms of the government, teachers, and the community, because it's going to take a collective effort, we're going to find ourselves a year or 2, whenever we're out on the other side of the pandemic, trying to find ways to uplift these young people so that they can get back to where they need to be. Because we're already reading grade levels behind. But I think we're going to, unfortunately, I think we're going to find ourselves in a situation where we're more than just the average decline, but even lower.
Wow. Thank you, JB. Jenna, what's the next question?
Okay. This sounds like a good one for Brad. What type of solutions are you recommending your clients implement for their working parents? I know that many school systems released their reopening plans this week, and stress amongst working parents with school-aged children is high.
I think rethinking how work is done, I think, is the most important piece. I think we need to start looking at a workplace as it used to be, that people asked people to come to work because they wanted to hold people accountable. We can hold people accountable for outcomes. We can hold people accountable for getting their work done. I don't need to see someone at their desk to know that. There are other ways to work through and manage that. A workplace should be about building culture, collaboration, and relationships. there is no reason why there are a vast majority of people can't work from home. And I just think that we have to start thinking differently about the way work gets done. We have to think differently about when work has to get done. I mean, if my kids are in school till 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I want to work from 3 into the evening and I'm still getting my work done and that doesn't harm anything, why can't I? So I think flexible hours, flexible shifts, remote work, and a variety of other types of things that we can look at to redefine work and the way it gets done, I think is the most powerful thing we could do right now. I also think we should look at some benefits that help people when they're dealing with these kinds of things. And there is no reason why we can't look at benefits and policies to support working parents.
All right. Thank you, Brad. The time has gone by so fast, and we're about 10 minutes shy of our deadline for today. I hate to cut it off at this point. So what I would like to do is, first I want everybody to know that this session is being recorded and it is going to be posted on the Memphis SHRM website. So you'll be able to see it in its entirety. For those of you who are able to stay with us as we finish and go into round 2, we welcome you to stay. For those of you that have to drop off, we're gonna have a part 2 of this as well. So you can see it live, and obviously I think the next time we'll just focus on this piece, but I'm gonna ask if our panelists are available that we go ahead and go through with round 2 and for the recording piece. And for those who can stay, you're welcome to stay. If you have to drop off, we understand, but we will make this session available to you on the website and we'll send it out so people who have to drop off can be able to see and view it later at your leisure. But now we're gonna, panelists, are we good? Okay, so we're gonna move into round 2. In most generations, there comes a time where there is a seismic event or an event that's so critical that it offends our conscience to the point to where there's no other option but action. I think the murder of Emmett Till in 1955 was one of those pivotal moments, and it helped propel the civil rights movement at that time. While the circumstances around Emmett Till's murder and lynching were commonplace at that time, I think that it was the courage of his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, and her courage in displaying his mutilated body at his funeral, and Jet subsequently using that as the cover of one of their magazines. I think that propelled it and the world took notice, and that ended up becoming one of the catalysts to propel the civil rights movement into motion. And now we're at a point where we have another Black man being murdered with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds by a police officer with a smirk on his face and his hands in his pocket. I think that's activated the moral outrage, and it set us on a journey to strive to reach the full promise of America. I think it's another one of those points, a pivotal point. I would like to start out by asking the panelists, why do we feel, because we've had several murders be videotaped before leading it up to this, Aubrey Ahmaud most recently, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice. Why now, why at this time, why has George Floyd's murder taken on that same level of importance as Emmett Till's did in 1955?
Well, I kind of precluded that answer a little earlier when I said the world has slowed down. And I believe that we have, as a culture, began to mourn, and I heard a friend of mine say this, mourn those things that have happened in our lives that we've continually suppressed, and now they've bubbled up, and we're in our silence. We're beginning to hear them. We're beginning to feel them, and it's very present. And so we were a part of a little demonstration. I was a part of a peaceful march not too long ago. It was very hot, and they said, let's kneel at this part of the march for 8 minutes, for the amount of time that George had was the knee was on his neck. And the guy said, we got 6 minutes to go. And I was about ready to stand up. And then my knees were burning because I was kneeling down on hot concrete. And then he said, we got about 4 minutes to go. And I was like, Lord, I feel like I'm not committing to this process because I'm uncomfortable. And then I began to stand up and bend over and trying to stay in the fight, stay in the cause. And they said, we got about a minute to go. And so I think about, we've had so many minutes to go, and you keep pushing and you keep pushing and you keep pushing. And this time around, we've had to face it differently. We've had to participate in it differently. All of us have had to face that this is real and we're going to have to speak up. And so for me, that was just very eye-opening that someone went through that, and many people have before that I don't know. And then I have 2 African-American boys that are 18 and 21. And I think about that they're out there driving in their cars every day, and I don't have control over that. And what happens, and every time they text me or call me, I'm concerned, you know. And so I believe in the midst of the silence and all the things that have slowed us down, I've had to become more aware of those things that frighten me, those things that are reality that we're seeing, and trying to come together with terms about how are we going to right the wrongs? How are we going to find the justice that all of us deserve? And so that is kind of where I have been in this recent resurgence of the Emmett Tills of our day.
Randy, could you do me a favor? Could you repeat the question? I want to make sure
The question was, why do we feel at this point it's taken on the importance and it's gotten the attention and it's really gotten the moral outrage of everybody?
Okay.
And what's made it such a pivotal moment when we've had murders videotaped before?
Okay, so hate to be so I consider myself a realist when it comes to, you know, these type of issues. Yesterday, I think it wasn't yesterday, a couple of days ago, I was scrolling through Netflix and I stumbled upon a documentary from James Baldwin about, I think the title was I Am Not Your Negro. And I was watching the documentary and I saw a similar situation to this. In the documentary, there was an officer on the neck, I believe a woman in Montgomery, Alabama. And I was like, man, I wish I could get a copy of that picture. And I Googled it, and I could not find that picture. And I'm just really thinking about where we are in terms of potentially moving forward and whether or not that this moment would last longer than right now. And I honestly do not believe it's a situation where everyone has collectively bought into what I would say is the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's for a large percentage of people, a large percentage of America, this is simply a fad. It's simply, how can I protect my bottom line? And when you think about it like that, if you know that you stand to lose millions and millions and millions of dollars because Black people, they are consumers. If you know that you stand to lose millions and millions of dollars, what you're gonna do, and all you have to do is say, I support Black lives, I support Black people, and there's nothing else you have to do, you're gonna make the decision. So I don't think it's a situation where America has some type of spiritual awakening in the sense that we understand the issues that face this community. We want to make meaningful change in this community. Ultimately, for them, it's the bottom line. If we could just take a look at the Washington Redskins, they've been calling for a change of the name of that particular organization for years. But when companies, for decades, and when companies started to say that we're gonna take your merchandise off the shelf, we're no longer gonna sell your product. Oh, we understand the error in our ways, and we want to change the name of this organization. It's not about the fact that they support Black people, they support Black lives, they support police reform, they want to address the inequities and the systemic racism in their organizations. No, they're ultimately concerned about the dollar. So I don't think it's a situation where we're experiencing an awakening. That's one thing. And then the second thing, what I've noticed, and I often, my dad is 74 years old, and I often give him a hard time just because I like to. And we debate every single day about different issues, because a lot of times we don't see it eye to eye. And he likes to talk just like I like to talk. But what I would often tell him, I would say, this millennial, this Generation Z, we are not your generation. What you've noticed is, one, we have social media. So if we think it, we're probably gonna tweet it. We're probably gonna post about it. And once you find out that there's more people out there of your age, of a similar mindset to be vocal about issues, you're gonna feel more willing to share. Ms. Johnson talked about, when she was marching, she looked around and she saw young white people marching in the street and say, look, I stand in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. One, because they felt protected in that moment. And just to end here, on the city council, I was made aware of a situation with a restaurant in the city of Memphis. And their restaurant had policies that essentially said that Black people have to eat upstairs. And I remember giving my remarks on the city council. Before I knew it, I said, we're not gonna go back to Jim Crow. You will not make me go to the back of the bus. I will not sit upstairs. I will sit wherever and with whom I want. And the only reason that I knew about it, because I did not frequent the restaurant, the only reason I knew about it because individuals and the group that was protesting this restaurant were made up of mostly young people. And I'm 32 and they were younger than me, they were protesting. So, and the idea that, young people can't create change, I hear that all the time, that young people can't do it. I hear it all the time, but I always have to point them to someone who was 26 years old and led a movement that changed the world. Dr. King was 26 when he started this. 26, that's a young person, So my point is, for all the young people out there fighting for change, please, whatever you do, keep applying pressure, because there's people in these positions that hear you, that's gonna push back. And to touch on Mr. Yates' area, because when you do that, it gives people like me the ability to make sure that when we talk about change, it's not just about racism, it's about the economic dollars. Because after advocating against those policies at their restaurant, that same restaurant went out and hired a Black-owned law firm to do an independent investigation. That same restaurant went out and hired a Black PR firm. That same restaurant hired Black management. That same restaurant brought in Black rapists. Because what we have here is a situation, if everyone stay as engaged, the young people stay as engaged, we have an opportunity to move the needle where it needs to be moved, which is the economic needle.
Wow. That's powerful, JB. I think, Effie, I think it's on you. And you, JB, you made me come up with a couple of more questions. I know I sent you guys the questions beforehand, but you bring up some good points that I'll throw in as some follow-ups as we go through. Thank you.
I'll have to ask you to repeat the question.
But I'll tell you what,
I was shouting over here, but
for
JB
the sake of time, we're going to move forward. So the question was, why do we feel like this murder at this time received the attention? But I think that JB very eloquently covered so many different bases with that. So I'm going to go through some more of the presentation that we've got, and these are faces of some of the other victims. And I really want to highlight Breonna Taylor right now, because in her case, we still haven't seen the beginning of justice, because they still have not charged or arrested the murderers of Breonna Taylor, who was slain in her home while she was asleep by the police. Well, for the sake of our conversation, I want to frame the trauma that Black people in America deal with from racism. And I want to frame it in talk about racism from three standpoints. From systemic racism, and that's the racism that's experienced by institutions and policies that operate to produce racist outcomes. And then interpersonal racism, which involves two or more people and can be manifested through bigotry, bias, prejudice, and microaggression. And then internalized racism, and that's the internalized acceptance of negative stereotypes and societal beliefs about one's racial group. And I'm not saying that systemic racism towards Black Americans is defined by just those three categories, but we can't talk about it all, so I wanted to frame it from that standpoint. And I wanted to talk about, and JB, you lead me into a good question. Can you legislate morality? You know, from policy and practice, and from the need to look at a company's bottom line or their equity by share, the equation that Mark gave out. You know, can some good come from that need having to change from that standpoint?
No is the
That was the answer.
the most precise answer that I can give you. But what you can do, and I think we look at the former mayor of Atlanta during his time of office, what he did. He understood that, you know, in his position as mayor, there's nothing he can do about the way that people viewed him and people who looked like him. But he had the ability to change the way that the city did businesses with those entities. He came in and simply said that I need 40% of the contracts to go to Black-owned businesses. And if you're not on board with it, I'm not going to do business with you. It took him years. It took him a long time in order to get to that point. And finally, those companies who have been dominating the market, keeping Black-owned, small-owned business owners out of the wheelhouse, say, you know what? The only way that I'm going to do business with the city of Atlanta, if I bring in some Black people, I'm going to bring in some Black people. So you cannot legislate morality, but what you can do is make sure that those companies, those entities who've been discriminatory, include people. Because what I'm trying to make sure that I stated precisely. It's not the elected official's job to tell people how to feel, but what it is, the role and responsibility of the elected official is to make sure that any entity that contracts with your municipality respects and supports every company, not just a particular group. So we're talking about dollars.
So
And
Brad,
one more thing, because I do want to talk about Memphis here. If we could just look, and to shout out Mark for making sure I was aware of it when it happened. If we could just look at the city of Memphis, very first proposed budget post-pandemic. Years past, the Black Business Association were receiving a significant amount of money. But the very first proposed budget, the Black Business Association was given $0. That was later rectified, but the fact that we have one organization here that's in charge of supporting Black-owned businesses, and when we have some type of disaster, pandemic, the very first thing we do is let's take away money from the Black people. That's a problem, and it's up to us to correct it.
So Brad, from a systemic standpoint for companies, and I know you've had some success in helping companies with their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. What's the responsibility for a company in regards to acknowledging the history of systemic racism in America?
Well, I think it's important for not only the company, but individuals as a whole too need to recognize and acknowledge the history of this country. You know, one of the things that we're debating now are statues, for instance. And I'm amazed that people view taking down Confederate statues as erasing history. I've heard that phrase before. Ironically, I think we have to, organizations, individuals, leaders have to acknowledge systemic racism and history as a whole. You know, for hundreds of years, African Americans in this country haven't had a voice to write history, you know, and if they did, we would have things like slave auction sites memorialized so that people were aware of what happened in this country. Lynching sites, people would be aware of where that happened in this country. And we wouldn't be memorializing people that tried to secede from this country and keep racism going. And so to me, I think there's a heck of a lot of acknowledgement that needs to happen. I want to just say one thing, which is I think this is a process, and it's not an on and off switch. Is what I'm saying is we have to acknowledge that we are way too slow at making change in this country and making it right. We have not lived up to our promise at all. At the same time, we also have to acknowledge that we have made some progress, right? We've got to look at where we have made some progress. And if we can do that, then we can begin to see needles move. And so to what JB said earlier, you know, I don't think we're there in terms of people really changing because they're just giving it lip service. There are companies that give it lip service. Absolutely, there are. But then there are companies that really want to make a difference, and there are people that really want to make a difference. And I think we have to look at it from a standpoint of trying to create tipping points. I had a white male, older white male, say to me the other day, and this is in reference to his company, I want to make a change. I want to make this an inclusive, equitable work environment. I had an epiphany. This all is because of George Floyd and everything else going on and all the statistics that are coming out for people to see. And he's just become more aware. He said to me, I never realized that I walked through life with this much privilege. I never realized what other people had to go through. I probably should have, but I didn't. And now that I'm becoming aware, I want to go down this road even further. I want to learn what my biases are. I want other people in this company to learn what their biases are. I want us to take this road. And he is planning a 3-year commitment to try and get to a better place. He'll go beyond 3 years, but starting with a 3-year commitment to try and change his company and the people in his company and himself to really reflect on and deal with this issue. So to me, I think what we have to look at is we can't make broad generalizations. Yes, there are companies that want to give lip service. They're putting window dressing up, but there are people and companies that are finally getting it. And I think we have to hold up both. We have to honor those that really are starting to get it and hold them up to say, this is where we need to go. And we need to highlight and show the folks that don't get it in a way that says, we can't keep this going, right? There needs to be an approach here that recognizes those differences.
And to JB's point, though, for those companies that we feel are just giving it lip service, we've got to figure out ways to hold them accountable to continue to get Black business and continue to get the Black dollar. And even if it's a ingenuine means that brought them to the table, then we've got to hold them to the table. And how do we keep them at the table? And how do we maybe turn that negative into a good? Effie, from your standpoint, from a community engagement standpoint, for people that are looking to get involved, for non-minorities that are looking to become an ally in the community, what would be some of your suggestions for one, helping them to acknowledge where we are and where we've been as a country, and then how can they roll up their sleeves and meaningfully get involved with the community to do some good?
Well, first of all, we engage in meaningful communication. I've been invited behind the scenes to talk to various different schools and banks and different places like that, and try to help them see what is happening and how do you include those already in your organization that are African American, to begin to have a conversation so that we can begin to move forward in seeing things from a different vantage point. And then in regard to helping us help our neighbor in need, which in Memphis is majority African American people, we're inviting people to volunteer side by side, help us to serve food, help us to pass out gloves, help us to pass out masks, and we were having to get help to get internet for some of our clients that they can't communicate or get involved in any of the things they need to be because they don't have access. Help us to do that, and then we work alongside creating a relationship with those people that we're serving, so that they're not just someone you're giving something to, but it's a relationship, it's a partnership, and it's a friend-to-friend goal. How can we not just me give to you, but that we're giving to each other, we're learning from each other. And so we have those opportunities, and they're beginning to unfold and blossom, but this is a way to begin to engage.
Thank you, Effie. Mark, from a small minority Black business, or any Black business for that matter, doesn't have to be a small business, how do we look at and start to, as a country, address those systemic barriers or institutions that have kept them from being able to be successful in business, and have been barriers to them being successful in business?
Well, sure, and I'm glad you asked. I think Brad said something that was important, and we need to stick with that. He used the phrase "way too slow," and that we've made some progress. Those are two things. They're two facts that we can deal with, and so let's deal with it as facts. I want to step back also to we're the only country that I can think of in the history of the world where the vestiges of the morality, you talked about, can you legislate morality, but the vestiges of the morality of the vanquished are prominently displayed and elucidated. And those are the Civil War statues. And if anybody has ever been to Richmond or downtown Memphis and seen the number of the Confederate Army and the Confederacy, they were the ones that lost, if I have it correct. And so, but you still have had these vestiges of the morality of what that stood for. And that has led to the compromise of the character of the morality of the entire nation. Think about it. It's just, that's what a statue, and that's what they represent. So as we think about that, and then now flip it into the economic realm, in the boardroom, if you are allowing those vestiges, those things to exist, and they are going unchecked, you are not going to get the best, you're not going to have the best out of your entire population. So that's the issue. We have to deal with it smack dab head on. And Effie, I really appreciate the story you told about the march and the 8 minutes. That represents, that period, that 8 minutes represents a too long period. 8 minutes is too long. It's a long time. And then we look at 50 years since Dr. King died, then we go back 450 years and keep going back. We got to move, folks. This is not a game. And how do we do it? Everything needs to be on the board, needs to be on the table in terms of how do we move the needle forward. Brad, you're talking about needles. How do we move needles forward? We've got all the data and all the studies and all the information to know. And I just tell people, I'd say it's just bad. It's just bad. And you know, what does that mean? If you want me to tell you what it means, I got plenty of books around here where I can show you what it means. But we just got to work together. And you know, we have made some progress, but I'm not indicting people and pointing fingers. I'm just saying, let's face the facts and let's move forward if we can. And now, if you want to deal with some of my other friends, y'all, I went to Howard University. If any of y'all know where Howard University is and what it represents, and you want to check my Black bona fides, you can go and you can check them. So I'm just saying that from that.
Okay. Well, thank you. So that's the first round of questioning on systemic racism. When we look at next, that interpersonal racism, and that's the racism that involves two or more people and can be manifested through bigotry, bias, prejudice, and microaggressions. I really want to address the rise of the Karens, and now we've got Lloyd, the gentleman that was videotaped in Collierville, and just see more and more of these situations where you have white people questioning Black people and where they should be at times. And my question around that is, How effective do you think, because what I see happening, and I've been a diversity and inclusion practitioner for some time, when these things happen and they're on videotape, and whether it's a company that makes the faux pas, whether it's a person, diversity and inclusion training is always the first thing that we talk about. So I want to get your thoughts on how effective diversity, inclusion, and equity education is in addressing interpersonal racism. And Brad, I'm gonna start out with you on that one, because I know we've talked about putting together programs, and I know that you've had success in helping companies improve in that area.
I mean, I think it depends on the approach, the quality of the content, and the facilitators. I've seen some really bad programs. I've seen some really good programs. I think that makes a big difference. I've actually seen diversity inclusion programs create more problems than help. So I think you've got to make sure that if you're going to do it, you're going to do it well, and you're picking good resources. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is training is not always the answer. I'm going to repeat that. Training is not always the answer. You've got structural issues. You've got representation issues. You've got policy issues. There are so many things that you should be looking at. For instance, the way you hire people, the tools you use to hire people. Do they create a sense of neutrality where you're actually making decisions based on people's skill sets and what they can bring to the table? Or is there bias already built into the system that you're unaware of? They did a great study that's been redone over and over again where they've taken the same exact resumes, for instance, and they just placed different names on them. One were generic, typically would be general Caucasian names, and the other one was typically ethnic names, African-American type names, right? And they sent them to recruiters. And the recruiters would take the ones with the ethnic names, and they would say they're not qualified. And they take the ones with the generic kind of Caucasian names, and they would say they're qualified. When asked how they made the decision, the recruiters did not think they made it based on any bias. They thought they made it based on skill set. When shown the fact that the resumes were the same, they were shocked. Well, how do you remove bias? First of all, every single one of us is biased. I don't care whether we're male, female, black, white, Asian, Latino, all of us have bias. And so to ask people to try and overcome all of that solely on their own isn't going to work. We actually have to adopt systems, structures, policies that actually combat and deal with those things, as well as do training. So I think, my biggest concern is we do training as a cure-all. Training is nice, and don't get me wrong, I think we should do it. But I think we need to be able to look at beyond that and do a deep dive and make some sincere, sustainable efforts that are going to make real change.
So, Effie, from a community standpoint, what is the responsibility of the community to educate people in regards to interpersonal racism or setting the tone for that?
Before I can say it that way, I have to say that there's got to be an agreement that what I'm saying is real, what I'm saying is truth, and that you can't decide that what I'm saying doesn't make sense. So that's the first thing. And that doesn't make sense here unless you've had that type of engagement where you said, I don't feel appreciated, or I feel like someone's mistreating me. And then there's other people deciding that you don't feel that way. That's not how you feel. Why would you say that? And so and from a community side, I believe those of us that lead and can advocate for those that do not have a voice will be most necessary right now. Those of us that can speak on behalf of those that have never had the opportunity, would not know how to communicate it in a way that someone would come and listen so that we can begin to let them share. We've got to invite people to the table so that the people in the community can have their turn to share. And so that's what I feel that is most important. I am a part of the community, but I represent those that I serve, but I don't represent everything they think or feel. And I believe that what has happened is that there have been people like me and others that mean well, but we have to have the people that are out there that are just as smart, just as creative, love their children just the same, to be brought to the table. So if I can advocate to bring a person to the table so they can be heard, so they can speak their heart, so they can speak their truth, that is what I believe that we as community leaders have to do. That we're not controlling the boundaries of who gets in and out. We should be opening the floodgates so that people can come in and out and share what their truth is and what's going on with them, so that we can get to the heart of the matter and begin to really see change. So that's what I believe.
Right. JB, I'm gonna come back around to you in regards to this from a political standpoint. How do we create, or from a political standpoint, how do we create that environment where it takes away people feeling like they have the power to dictate where Black people can and can't be? Because that's one of the things that in my mind, that gives rise to the Karens and Lloyds. It's I have the power to say that you don't look like you should be here, and prove to me that you should be here. Almost as if we got to still carry around our freedom papers, almost.
Oh, man. The other day I was in Midtown with a colleague of mine, very well-known, respected lawyer in town. It's a pretty big guy. It's about 6'5". We had a conversation because, and I tell people a lot of times I'm trying to be intentional about not wearing suits everywhere I go. Because after being elected, people would refer to me differently. People would treat me differently than they treated me in the past. So, if you look today, I'm wearing a blazer and a t-shirt hoodie that says Councilman Smiley on it. But I'm intentional about not wearing suits everywhere I go, because I do not want to be treated differently than my colleagues. But, back to his story. So this day, he owns a law firm in downtown Memphis. This particular day, he does not wear a suit. He wears some basketball shorts and a t-shirt. He parks on a downtown street, is getting ready to walk into his firm. A white police officer pulls up beside him and says, "Where are you going? What are you about to do?" Question him as if he did not belong. And he simply says, "I'm about to walk in my firm." He says, "Your firm?" He says, "Yeah, my firm." And he was like, he pulled out his license. He says, "Look, this is my name. The name matches the name on the building. My firm." He says, "Oh, okay, carry on." And from a legislative standpoint, when you have occurrences like this, law-abiding citizens, individuals who are productive members in our community, you hear stories like this and you are, to be honest, you're not surprised. You're not surprised. But, in terms of legislating or addressing this from a political standpoint, the best thing that, we can do with our positions is shed light on every instance as we can. There's a couple ways we could do it. One, we could continue to expose like we've exposed with Karen and Lloyd's situation. Or you can have the other way, other than exposure, you can have personal conversation with each and every person. But then, in terms of a legislative ability that we have on city council and other councils and commissions, is the power of pen. We can create policies that the city to include, and we can also pass resolutions encouraging other companies to include the policies that combat this type of racism. But it's problematic. But going up every single day, waking up every single day, looking myself in the mirror and knowing that I'm a Black person, I'm not surprised by any occurrence, because we've been experiencing this forever. I was in law school, my first year in law school, and I had some of the best and brightest minds in the realm, and I can remember vividly people would question if I was supposed to be there. One person told me I need to thank God for affirmative action, and another person, after I received a job offer from Rose Law Firm, the very same law firm that Hillary Clinton worked in, was asking, is he qualified? How did he get the job? Like, these are the type of questions that people who are in positions of power have every single day. And when they believe that, we're less than, or people who look like me do not belong in a particular place, and their colleagues are not strong enough, because I'm gonna have to use the word strong enough, convicted enough to say, let me address that right then and there. We're gonna continue to have these problems. So from a legislative standpoint, we're doing the same thing that everyone else is doing. Making sure that it is public, and we have to have those real conversations with people who have those microaggressions, have those personal biases, because if we don't, people will continue to think it's okay. And what I've done is, whatever I hear, I don't care if I'm on the street, I don't care if I'm at the restaurant, I have to address it. Until we get everybody in that position, until everyone understands that there's a moral obligation to address those things, we're going to continue to have it, and people are going to continue to think it's okay. Everyone has to understand that we have to address it.
So we all have to become intolerant of it and call it out and hold people accountable for that. Thank you, JB. I'm gonna cover one other slide. I wanted to go over and give some tips on allyship to Black team members in the workplace. So, one, I think you have to openly acknowledge the trauma of racism towards Black Americans. Then companies need to provide a safe place for African Americans to express their feelings and the impacts of that trauma. And in most instances, I understand that your in-house people are not equipped for that. So you got to look to possibly contract culturally competent resources and make them available. So to your point, Brad, we can have good resources, good education, good processes and practices that give people an opportunity to express how they're feeling. Demonstrate meaningful organizational support. Don't make empty statements. If you're a company that made a statement in regards to Aubrey Ahmaud and George Floyd, and you were hesitant to call it racism or systemic racism towards Blacks, or to call what you saw a murder, that's an empty statement. and that would not ring true with people. Commit to being an anti-racist organization. Build networks of leaders and have accountability in every department for every facet of your organization. Advocate for policies and practices that tear down systemic barriers. Send representatives for your companies to represent your company in public hearings to push for better practices and policies. And listen to your Black team members. Whether you have focus sessions, whether you have targeted surveys to really get the voice of them and take action on what you get back from those surveys. Having one-on-ones and having reverse mentoring, especially at your executive level, to have reverse mentoring sessions where they talk to Black team members that aren't other executives, but are frontline Black team members, to really hear what the experience of working in your company is like from someone Black on the front line, and what they're seeing. That's impactful. And not to just have it once, but to have an ongoing, meaningful reverse mentoring session established with some of your frontline Black team members would be powerful in a meaningful way to move forward with that. So in closing, I would like to ask each of you to give me your thoughts on how do we choose community in our actions moving forward? What do we all take from here today and go back and say, we don't want chaos, we want community. How do we move forward with that? What would be your key point or takeaway that you would share with our participants today? And we'll start. Mark, you didn't get a say on the last go around, so we're gonna start with you on this one, Mark.
Yeah, my last name is Yates, so I'm used to being the last. And
just by it being why. I thought you were about to say I got to call you Mr. Yates. I was about to say, come on, man. No worries. No, I want to just say thank you. I think it's conversations such as this that provide just an opportunity for people to talk and hear other perspectives, other thoughtful people. And that's really my closing word, is just thank you for having me on. And I just like for everyone to just be vigilant about understanding that these situations are complicated, but we have to work in a positive fashion. And I'll leave with that. Okay. Thank you, Mark. Brad?
I think there's in today's world with so many cameras and phones and social media and things like Glassdoor, and there is so much power in any one individual to be able to tell their story and to teach people. And so I think I would suggest that we look at both our personal power of what we can deliver and share with others and how we can change people, but how we can do things collectively. How do we pull people in to the conversation, not just start one ourselves, but how do we pull people in and recognize that we are in this together? If we don't fix this, we all suffer, right? This is really going to break down our society, our country. And so we are in this together, and we have to help fix it together. And I think that's the key thing, is how do we do things as a group collectively? I think that's what we have to figure out. And I say that with one caveat. Some people don't have the skill set and the self-awareness to be a part of that conversation. And so I think as a society, we need to figure out how we help people become part of that conversation. How do we get them the skill set to become that part of that conversation? I don't want to see it just wind up into yelling matches, which we've seen way too many times. That doesn't help anyone. So I would say, let's pull people in. Let's pull people in a good way. Let's start those conversations. They're crucial conversations. And I appreciate the time that we've had here together. And thank you, Randy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad. Effie, you're number 3. I got you in on the number 3 one time before it was over. So,
See if I can pull it off.
There we go.
Well, I have 3 things to say. The one is that I encourage us to all be willing to do the hard stuff, to be willing to do have these types of conversations like we're having today, listen to others' perspectives, and then see how we can move forward together. Number 2, to seek justice and understanding. We have to figure out how to understand. We have to create some ability to understand what's going on and then seek to have justice. And then number 3, do unto others as you'd have them to do unto you. I want people to treat me like I want to treat people. And if we follow that, we can have a better world.
Okay. All right. JB.
First, I just want to, huge shout out to every panelist today. I've been jotting down notes like I'm in school again. So I thoroughly enjoyed, just being an active listener today, because each and every one of you provided much needed feedback. Also, thank you, Randy, for the invitation. Thank everyone who's a part of this wonderful organization. And I'm trying to gather my thoughts and put it in a concise statement. But, for me, what I'm taking away from it as it relates to community, it's something that I said frequently during the campaign, was the role of an elected official. And when I think about the role of an elected official, I always come back to the word community, because community includes the homeless to the homeowner and every man, woman, and child in between. And it's up to each and every one of us to be responsible, to help, to support the other person. And if we're not doing that, we are not at service to this community at all. And our goal, and it has to be, everyone on this call, everyone who would listen to this panel discussion later, we have to use our privilege to uplift the next person. And it's not tomorrow, it's not 2 weeks from now. I think we've said it a number of times on this call, we're talking about right now. We are in the urgency of now. Change is coming too slow. Change is something that is active. It's going to take active people, an active community to drive out racism. It's going to take an active community to move dollars in the areas in which they are needed. So again, thank you all. And a huge favor to everyone listening. Keep applying pressure. Let's make real change.
All right. So we're going to open it up. Jenna, give us our 2 questions. and we're going to take these questions, and then we're going to get ready to close out.
Okay. Here's a good one from Jennifer. What suggestions do any of the panelists have for white people to help ourselves become more aware and in touch with the ongoing oppression of people of color?
Okay, who wants to take that one?
Ooh, I take it real quick. But I want Brad, but no, I think Brad would be better. But my real quick suggestion, what I've done, frequently during COVID-19, I went to Netflix and I just started watching some documentaries. So there's several documentaries that are on point that we can learn from, because I learn every single day. I try to get better every day. Go watch some documentaries, and it will give you just a snippet of things, active steps that you can take to become better, a better ally in this movement. Brad, take it away.
I was going to say, watch documentaries, read, educate yourself, experience a different part of town if you haven't gone to another part of town, and meet people and interact, and go to a church you've not gone to that's predominantly African American. I mean, really test yourself and stretch yourself. But the biggest thing I'll say, I'm going to quote Hamilton right now. Thank you, Lin-Manuel Miranda. Listen more, talk less. Hear what the other folks are feeling, experiencing. Begin to understand what it's like for people in the Black community. Listen more, talk less.
Hey, I got to jump in on that one real quick. Go to our website at bbamemphis.com. We have a historical timeline that just goes back past 1862 that's going to show you the history of Black business along with civil rights activities running in the timeline. So that just is a quick way to learn how bad it's been.
Yeah, and I would say a book that I suggest to friends of mine that ask the same question is called How to Be an Anti-Racist by Kendi Ibram. I think that it's a great book that helps break down, that helps give some real meaningful tips in that regard. So, Jenna, what's the next question?
Okay. Thank you for those suggestions. This is from Verlinda. Many major corporations have issued statements in support of Black Lives Matter. In Memphis, which is 65% Black, what is needed to take the concept beyond a slogan and help the Black community, including individuals, families, and businesses, feel meaningful support?
So well, Black people are not a slogan. So that's the first thing. We need to understand that is just a way of verbalizing something that is quick and easy to say, but it's more to it than that. And I try to remind people, when people say, "What about this? Why does this mean anything?" Black Lives Matter too is what you're saying. We're saying if I don't matter, nobody else matters. All of us matter, but it has to be that we're specifically talking about Black Lives Matters. If we're not going to include that, then that's going to be an issue. So I think that's one of the things that we've got to remember, that we're not a slogan, we are people, and that businesses and larger companies have to begin to see through that view and treat us equally. And that's the way I feel about that.
So I want to thank the panelists. We're about to get ready to close out. For everybody that's still out there with us, I think we have some very hard days ahead. I think the current crises that we're looking at have shown the ugliness of our past as a nation, and it lends itself to why we're in our current state. This moral reckoning that we're talking about is going to require confession in order to clear the path for us to choose community and move towards community. And once we've had that true confession and that reckoning, then we can focus on the great ideals that the country was founded on. And I think when we look at those ideals and aspirations of this country being a place where there is room for everyone to succeed, I think then we can move towards that path of community. And I think we've got to have that confession, and we've got to have that acceptance that we've been great in spots, but we've been really bad in these areas when it comes to systemic racism and righting those wrongs from that. But I think once we start to clear that and accept and acknowledge that, we can move forward towards community. But we still got a lot of work to do and a lot farther to go in this fight. So now I am going to turn it over to Jenna and Christine, my co-chairs, and they're going to cover a few of the things that we have coming up as a committee. Did I go too far?
Okay, I think.
Oh, there we go.
Christine, she might have lost her internet connection.
Okay, so it's on you, Jenna.
I know we've run over, so I'll just keep this short. I believe the next slide, it was about the conference. Well, I'll just mention, so we have an upcoming SHRM Memphis Inclusive Diversity Conference. It's actually going to be November 1st. It's going to be the first part of the SHRM State Conference. So we hope you'll join us there. Also upcoming for SHRM Memphis is the July 21st HR Connect. It's an opportunity for you to network with other HR professionals. And the main topic of conversation will be COVID and its impact on HR. And that has actually been moved to a virtual only event. And we also have the legal conference, which will be August 11th. That's also been taken to a virtual platform just to keep everybody safe. And please don't forget to fill out this survey to tell us how you like this session. I know Randy wants to have follow-up conversations like this. Please, we want to know how you like the session. And again, thank you, Randy. Thank you, the panelists, and thanks for everyone for attending.
All right. Well, everybody be well, be safe, and be caring to one another. And have a good evening. Thank you, everybody.